Hey everyone, Rick here, and this is just going to be a gameplay video of Blades and Arrows Battleground. This is the introductory scenario, which is a goblin assault on a small farm. Now it's a cooperative scenario, so both players are going to be working together to try to defeat the goblins in 4 rounds, as denoted by these 4 crop tokens. At the end of each round, a crop token will be removed, and if, unfortunately, at the end of the 4th round, the 4th crop token is removed, that means the goblins have overran the farm and we lose. However, so the goal here is, before the end of the 4th round, to defeat all 9 of these goblins. There's going to be 4 goblin archers, there's going to be 4 goblin infantry, and 1 ferocious goblin rat rider. Now the player team, since this is an introductory scenario, it's basically to get you used to how the 4 basic units on the human side work. So we have cavalry, ranged cavalry, infantry, and archers. I have a little mock-up stat card for each of them, and both players have identical forces. However, the sculpts of the figures themselves are different, just so you don't get them confused. And then a preset spawn zone. Each of these spawn point hexes can hold 1 figure. So the first thing you do is deploy, so you can put your units on any of the hexes that you would like. And we'll just do something like that. Of course, you would typically take into consideration how far your units can move, what their range is, and how close they are to your opponent, but we'll just go ahead and do something like this. And then you would normally roll off to see who goes first, but since this is cooperative and I'm just playing it solo, I'll just play this side first, then that side. So the players each get to take a turn, and then the goblins always finish each round. All right, so on a player's turn, you have movement, then a ranged attack phase, then a close combat attack phase. So we start off with movement. The cavalry each move 6 spaces apiece. Infantry and archers move 4 spaces apiece. You are able to take a second movement action if you'd like at half of that unit's movement value. However, if you do take advantage of that second movement opportunity, you then do lose the ability to make a ranged or close combat attack in that same turn. So it's always good to keep that in mind. But we'll go ahead and move this cavalry. You can move 6, so we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you don't have to use the full movement value if you don't want to or need to. That'll put him in close combat contact with that goblin archer there. Next up, let's go ahead and move this guy. We'll swing him to the outside. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to move him any further than that, even though technically he could take a second movement action. And then our ranged attackers. Well, let's see. We have a goblin archer there we want to take care of. So range is 6 for both of these guys. So the cavalry, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. That goblin archer's already in range. However, this guy, unfortunately, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he will need to move up 1 space in order to be able to hit that goblin archer. Now, that's important because if you move and shoot in the same turn, you do get a penalty to your attack roll. I'll just put this little token here to remind me that he moved, so that when he shoots, he'll have a -1 penalty to his die roll. All right, so that was movement. We've moved everyone we can or want to move, so the next phase is shooting. So we have 2 ranged units again. Both of them have range of 6, so that goblin archer is well within range. The only other thing to keep in mind is line of sight. So line of sight of Blades and Arrows Battleground is always judged from the center of the hex you're firing from, and taking into consideration the full width of the hex that you're targeting. If there's anything obscuring half or less of the target hex, it's a cover bonus to the opponent. So they'll get a +1 bonus to their defensive die roll. If there's something obstructing more than half of a target hex, then that hex simply cannot be targeted. But good news here, both these guys have clear line of sight to that goblin archer. So just like you can move your units in any order, now you can shoot with them in any order. So let's go ahead and do our infantry archer here first. So infantry archers, as denoted on this little card here, give an attack roll of 2d12. First thing to keep in mind when you're shooting at something is you want to exceed their armor value. So goblin archers only have an armor of 2. So with these 12-sided dice, we're looking for 3s or better. Now it's kind of hard to see with this color of dice, but we rolled a 9 and a 5. So both of those exceeded the Goblin Archer's armor. Now the Goblin Archer does have a defense of a D12. So 1d12 with these nice goblin green dice. We really want to at least get a 5 or better. A defense die roll has to equal or exceed the attack roll in order to beat it. So cut these wounds in half by hopefully getting a 5 or better, and we did. We got an 8. So even if this was a 10, even though that would make it higher than both dice, you just do each die individually, comparing them. So in this instance, he would have only been able to cancel out one of those anyway, which is fantastic that he did. So the 8 beats the 5. That cancels out that. He will, though, still take 1 wound. So we will take a little wound marker and put it right there. As a matter of fact, when you look at these dice, because he had this movement and shooting penalty, each of these would have been reduced by 1. So that would have brought it down to an 8 and a 4. So even with that being said, the defensive die roll would still only cancel out one of those, so that last die would still do a wound, which we have now signified there. I always point the wound markers toward the unit just so we all know that that figure is the one that is wounded. So he went ahead and wounded that Goblin Archer. I removed that token because we don't need that anymore. And then we'll fire with this ranged cavalry. Same thing here. Ranged cavalry also has an attack of 2d12. Again, we are trying to exceed the Goblin Archer's armor of a 3 or a 2, so we need 3s or better. We rolled a 1 and a 6. All right, so that means the 6 got through, but unfortunately the 1 did not. So a 6, Goblin could potentially come away unscathed if we roll a 6 or better here, and we do. We roll an 11, so that negates that attack. However, one of the unique things in this game is every unit has a battle die. A battle die is going to come into play when you're rolling to see who goes first, an initiative roll in a close combat situation, but also to see if you do miss or your attack is completely negated by the defender's defense roll. That gives you a chance to maybe still do some damage. So a battle die of a Goblin Archer's D6, battle die of ranged cavalry's D8. So a D8 versus a D6. So this white die, we're looking to exceed whatever is rolled on the green D6 to see if we still come away with a wound, and we do. So a 3 does beat a 1. That kind of gives an attacker a last-ditch effort, maybe pulls one more arrow out of his quiver real fast, shoots that goblin. Yes, he was able to do that. Now, the battle die rolls are unmodified, so there's no cover bonus or anything like that, or a penalty for moving and shooting with a battle die roll. Battle die rolls only come into play if that first attack roll did not do a wound. So in this case, the battle die roll came through, second wound on that Goblin Archer. Goblin Archers do have a health of 3, so one more wound and that archer will be toast. All right, so that was the movement phase. That was the ranged attack phase. So let's get into close combat. We have one melee going on here between the Goblin Archer and the cavalry. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is going to be a battle die roll-off. D12 is the battle die for cavalry. D6 is the battle die roll for the Goblin Archer. Roll this off to see who strikes first in close combat. And here you go. Even though a D12 is clearly superior to a D6, I just love that something like this could happen. So the Goblin Archer actually does get to strike first. 4 beats a 1. So the Goblin Archer, weak little pathetic Goblin Archer, is going to strike first against this cavalry. So Goblin Archers strike with 2 D12, and it rolls a 4 and a 2 compared to the cavalry armor value of a 6, which would have meant we needed to roll 7s or higher. Unfortunately, we did not get it. And also, you couldn't add the dice together, even if that would have mattered. That is his attack roll. He missed. However, because he missed, it is now time for a battle die roll. Can this Goblin Archer do it again? Roll higher than a D12 with his D6? Maybe, stick a dagger in that knight? He did, unbelievably, again rolled a 1 on a d12. So yes, the last ditch effort of that Goblin Archer was able to sneak through and do a wound. Cavalry have health of 5, so it's going to be a long night for that Goblin Archer. But the Cavalry did get a wound, so that's fantastic. I mean, terrible, because we're rooting for the humans, right? All right, so now the Cavalry, though, does get to strike back. Lost the initiative roll, but still gets to go if they're still alive. So Cavalry attacks with 3d12. Again, we are looking for 3s or better. We rolled kind of low on some of these, so we do have a 9 and 2 4s. And the Goblin Archer still gets their defense die of 1. So if they want to cut, you know, some of these wounds out of here, at least one of the wounds, obviously, we are going to try to roll a 4 or better on this die. And we do. We roll a 7. So the 7 cancels out one of the 4s. Still takes 2 wounds, however. So, I mean, that could have actually been a short night for the Goblin if it hadn't managed to get at least a 4 there. But it did. So it's still alive, but barely clinging to life with 2 wounds. All right, so that was movement, range, and close combat for the first player. So the second player now gets to activate. It's going to do something, I suppose, fairly similar. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with its cavalry. We already know that from this distance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that range cavalry is in range. This guy does need to move up 1. Again, we'll put a little token here and try to remember that this time that he did move, so he'll get a negative penalty to shooting. And then this infantry is going to do something else, try to help over on this west flank, so he's going to try to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, you can move through friendly units as long as they're not engaged. So I couldn't move here to here to here because this is considered a close combat engagement. I'd have to go around, for example. But he moved through there, so we are done with movement. No more moving, so let's move on to shooting. Same situation, basically. These two are going to want to target that Goblin Archer there. So this infantry crossbowman is going to be rolling 2d12, and again, trying to get 3s or higher. And again, these are going to both be -1 since he moved and shot. So he rolled a 6 and a 2. The 2 is reduced to a 1. It wouldn't have hit anyway, being a 2, but that is reduced then, and then the 6 is reduced to a 5. That's important, though, so the 1 didn't get through. The 5 did, but since it is a 5... Goblin Archer has a decent chance of rolling a 5 or better to avoid this wound, and it does. So it blocks that wound entirely. However, since he didn't do a wound, that Archer does get a last-ditch attempt with its 6-sided battle die. So it's basically going to be 2 6-sided dice here, because the Goblin Archer battle die is a d6, the Infantry Archer is a d6. So if this white die can exceed, not just equal, but exceed the green die, he'll manage to do a wound. And it was tied. Unfortunately, you do have to exceed. Tied at 1. Terrible roll, but the Goblin was able to stave off even that last-ditch attempt from that crossbowman. All right, so we can remove that token. Don't need that there anymore. Cavalry, ranged cavalry, is going to attempt to do something here. 2d6 for ranged cavalry attack. We have a 4 and a 2. Oh, how pathetic. So the 2 doesn't even get through that little goblin's armor. The 4 does. So again, this goblin could come away unscathed. It just needs a 4 or better. No, it rolled a 3. So unfortunately, that roll of a 4 still got through, which means, yes, this Goblin Archer now takes a wound from the cavalry. All right, so that was range. Let's move to melee. We just have 1 close combat over here to resolve. Same situation, battle die for initiative first, d12 for cavalry, d6 for the Goblin Archer. We'll see who strikes first, and this time, as probably expected, yes, the d12 was able to beat the d6. So the cavalry will get to go first, 3 d12s, striking the Goblin Archer, who has an armor value of 2, so we need 3s or better, and all 3 have hit. We have a 12, a 6, and a 4. All right, so the goblin, in order to stay alive, remember a goblin archer only has 3 health, so it needs to get at least a 4 here to cancel out one of those hits. And it did just barely get a 4. All right, so that cancels that out. That means this goblin archer does take 2 wounds, but hey, that's okay, because that does mean he'll get to strike back. If you are defeated before getting your close combat attempt, you don't get it. So the goblin archer does get to strike back, 2d12. Looking for 7s or better, because a 6 is the cavalry armor, and it rolled really well, a 9 and a 10. Now, cavalry, though, have a defense of 3d12, so we're looking for 9s and higher here. Oh, and we had a fantastic defense roll, 2 12s and a 10, so that easily cancels out the attack roll. However, battle die time. Can that goblin's d6 come up and strike, dig into that knight's armor with a little dagger or something? And it does. A 5 beats the 2, which means that last-ditch battle die effort of the goblin archer does a wound on the cavalry. All right, fantastic. That was movement, shooting, and close combat for both players. So now it's time for the goblin phase. So the goblin phase, again, goblins aren't controlled by any player. They have an AI set of rules, basically, that they follow, a program. So the way that works is they also move, shoot, and close combat, and they do it in order of cavalry, infantry, and range. So first we will move cavalry. Cavalry is going to move toward, first it targets the closest unit. Well, both of these cavalries here are close to this cavalry. So how does it determine? Well, it then goes to wounds. Who's the most wounded between the two? Well, they both have a wound. So then how does it decide? It goes by cost. Each of these units has a cost. Now, in this introductory scenario, you aren't buying units and spawning them, but the cost does still come into consideration for targeting purposes. However, both of these are still equal in cost. Cavalry costs 6 gold apiece. Now you roll off. So it targets closest first, then weakest, then lowest cost. And if it's still tied like it is here, roll off. All right, so you split it up, 1 through 6, 7 through 12. Who's he going for? We have a 6. All right, so he's going for the northern cavalry unit. We'll just move these tokens out of the way because this guy, movement of 6 for the Rat Rider. 1, 2 is all he needs. So he is now moved. He will engage in close combat later this turn. All right, so then infantry move. They do the same thing. Now in this case, it's not that hard to determine who moves where because each of these infantries are just simply going to go toward the closest cavalry. So this guy, for example, I'll move these tokens out of the way here so he can go 1, 2. This guy, he can't do that same thing. And again, you can't move through friendly units that are engaged, so he couldn't go 1, 2, 3. Instead, what he's going to do is hop the fence. Scaling another level is just an extra movement point. Jumping a fence is just an extra movement point. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3 to there. And then he is now engaged there. So that cavalry is a little surrounded at the moment by goblins. And a special goblin rule is going to come into play in just a little bit. I'll show you how that works. So these two goblin infantry then, well, we have this guy here. We have that guy over there. So who's closer? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get there. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get there. Now, goblin infantry can also only move 4, which means in order to get there, they are going to have to use that second movement attempt. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for their first movement. Not in base contact yet. The AI program says they use their second movement. However, that means they will not be able to initiate a close combat since they moved twice. Little token there to remind us of that. Similar situation over here. We will just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Put a movement token by him, so that will remind us that he can't close combat either. Range is a little bit different. First, obviously, you look and see if these goblin archers are already engaged, which they are, so they don't move. These two goblin archers are not engaged. However, since they prefer range, they're going to see if someone is within their range. So, for example, this goblin archer, we already know goblin archers also have a 6 space range. Since those two were able to hit him, then obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. So either of those are within 6. Now, as a matter of fact, this cavalry guy is 1, 2, 3, 4. Range does not necessarily target closest first. Instead, they prefer a clear line of sight over closeness. As long as all three of these guys are in range, but which has the clearest line of sight. So, for example, if he did target that cavalry, because the width of that target hex does cross the tree, that cavalry would get a +1 defensive bonus for being in cover. Preferably, he's going to want to shoot one of those two who do not get a cover bonus. So then who does he choose? Well, he would choose the weakest. Well, neither one have any wounds yet, so then it's lowest cost. So out of these 3 possibilities, this goblin archer is going to target this lower cost ranged infantry. Same situation down here, basically. He could try to shoot that cavalry, but the tree would kind of block it. So he's going to target one of those two. Neither have a wound yet, so he's going to go with the lowest cost. So let's go ahead and do this ranged attack first. So this goblin archer against this ranged infantry. Now, neither of these goblin archers moved, so these dice are going to be unmodified. 2d12 for goblin archer attack. Now, the armor on a ranged infantry is 3, so we're looking for 4s or higher. We got a 3 and we got a 7. So the 3 did not pierce the armor, but the 7 did. Now, the ranged infantry defense is also a d12, like the goblins. So we're looking for a 7 or better to avoid a wound here, and an 11 avoids the wound. However, it's battle die time. So green d6, white d6. Here we go. Can the green die exceed the white die? And it does. 6 to a 2. So that last-ditch battle die effort by the goblin archer is enough to sneak a wound on that archer. All right, perfect. And then same situation up here. We're going to go 2d12, looking for 4s or better. We got a 12 and a 6, so both of these are going to get through. And because the archer only has a 1d12 defense die, he's going to take at least 1 wound here, but he needs to get a 6 or better to avoid taking 2 wounds. And he rolls a 2. Oh no, so that goblin archer just did 2 wounds to our poor crossbowman friend in the north. All right, so that was range. Now it's time for melee. Again, these 2 goblin infantry can't do a close combat because they move twice this turn, but the rest of these infantry can, as well as the archers that are in close combat, and of course, our sneaky rat rider. So, close combat follows the same order of operations: cavalry, infantry, then the ranged units. So let's go ahead and start with this rat rider. One other additional note I wanted to make was that because obviously with humans, when you're shooting, you cannot target an opponent that is in base contact with a friendly unit. That is justified by you don't want to hit accidentally your friend in the tussle of combat. However, one of the special rules for goblins is goblin archers actually could target someone in base contact with their friends because they're kind of indifferent about hitting one of their buddies. They honestly don't care. So that is a special rule. They can target opponents in base contact with their friends. Additionally, another special rule which comes into play right here, right now, is in close combat, the horde rule for goblins. Each other goblin in base contact with the target of your close combat attack adds +1 to your attack roll. So goblin rat riders normally get 3d6, and they will in this case as well, but each of those dice will be added. We'll have 2 added because of those 2 allies. However, before we get ahead of ourselves, we do have an initiative roll here to see who strikes first between the rat rider and the cavalry. So the rat rider, d10 versus a d12 battle die for the cavalry. So who strikes first and it is a 6 to a 3, which means the cavalry will strike first. So the cavalry is going to get 3d6. Armor value on the Rat Rider is a 4, so we need 5s or better. And we rolled a 4, a 10, and a 9. So the 4 wasn't enough to exceed the armor, but we do have a 10 and a 9. Defense dice for the Rat Riders is 2d12. So we're looking for at least 9s or better. We roll a 3 and a 10. So the 10, again, it doesn't matter which of these dice it negates. It just negates one of them. The 3 doesn't do anything. So 1 wound still did get through. Not too bad. Rat Riders do have a health of 4, so that is a quarter of the Rat Rider taken away. However, the Rat Rider now gets to strike back 3d12, and remember, it gets +2 to all 3 of these dice. So this 7 becomes a 9, this 10 becomes a 12. You can never exceed 12 with any modifier, and a 5 becomes a 7, which is important because cavalry have a defense or an armor value of 6, so that means all 3 of these dice got through. Cavalry do have an armor value of 3d12, so we're going to need something at least over a 7 here to avoid some of these wounds. We do have an 8, we have a 7 and a 5, which unfortunately does mean, even though both of those exceed that 7, doesn't necessarily matter. It wasn't enough to beat anything else. Can't add them together. So 1 wound was negated, but that cavalry will now still take 2 wounds, which means that cavalry guy now has 3 wounds of his 5 possible. All right, so then it goes to the infantry phase. Now you can see why you may not want to rush in, because those goblins will horde around you and get incredible bonuses. In this instance, that is exactly what happened. Okay, so otherwise, it is infantry time, so you can basically do the infantry in any order. We'll just go right here first. Again, these 2 can't do anything, so we have 1 here and 1 here. So let's go ahead and do this one first, because this one could be interesting, simply due to the fact that it is possible to maybe eliminate that cavalry officer right now. Again, initiative roll, battle dice first, d12 for the cavalry, d8 for the infantry. We're looking to see who goes first, and it's the goblin. Oh my gosh, the goblin's 4 beats the 3, so this goblin infantry gets 2d12, needs 7s or better to hit. We lost 1, we have a 10. What's the other one going to be? It is also a 10. Oh man, 3d12 defense dice though. And actually, no, they're both 12s. Yes, because of the horde rule, each of them get +2, +1 for that guy, +1 for that guy. So we do have 2 12s here. If at least one of these 3 defense dice is not also a 12, that cavalry guy is doomed. And it is a 6, a 3, and a 1. The defense dice did nothing. 2 more wounds on that cavalry. Takes him to 5. He is dead. Remove the wounds, remove him from the board, put a kill token out there to show they just splattered that cavalry officer. Then to continue the game, you would finish the rest of the infantry close combat, then the archers would close combat. If anyone isn't able to close combat anymore because someone they were targeting is dead, they simply skip that phase. So obviously at the end of this, there's still going to be goblins there. We would remove 1 crop token. We would begin the second round with this side doing the same thing. So that is just a taste of how of Blades and Arrows Battleground works. I hope that you thought that that was exciting as I did. I play test this game over and over and over again. I still freaking love it. It is unexpected, just the luck of the die rolls. A little goblin archer can do something, especially when it's in a horde against a strong cavalry officer. But again, the humans, 4 turns to take out those goblins. Can they do it? I don't know. If we finish this game, who do you think would win at this point? The goblins are looking pretty good, but you never know. All right, folks, I'm going to end it here. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time.